Ahoy, and welcome. This is Admiral. In this part 2 of my consideration of possible South American content, we'll be discussing a few, but not all possible civilizations, for which you'll probably have to wait for Rabilava's likely future video on how much we can add to South America. The scope of this video is more limited to a few that I think are the best matches for AoE2's design philosophy and constraints. And even then, I'm having to split this top 6, already a split from the last video, into 2 videos.
This is getting out of hand. Now there are 2 of them.
The constraints in question include timeline, technological, architectural, military, and other historical achievements that lend themselves well to civilization design and interesting gameplay potential. None of these candidates are completely ideal across all relevant metrics, with lack of written records in South America's pre-Columbian era being the most limiting factor for campaigns especially, but with technological and other gaps relative to the Inca Empire also playing a role in how credibly they can be depicted as fully fledged civilizations. Even so, AoE2 has always been very generous in allowing for technological and other anachronisms for the sake of gameplay, or frankly sometimes just for the sake of inexplicably oddball design choices that we tolerate because we've had up to 26 years to get used to them. From Japanese trebuchets and Ethiopian torsion engines to fire ships for everyone, the design convention prior to this May has always seemed to be that for gameplay purposes, notable civilizations compatible with medieval chronology have been found to be surprisingly technological, rather than more chronologically distant factions with certain technologies being found to be surprisingly medieval. Of course, I don't take these gameplay compromises as an invitation to entirely ignore the game's intended basis around a fixed historical timeline, or in maintaining some semblance of realism and historical verisimilitude, hence my emphasis on the metrics mentioned. Worth noting when we try to consider what the indigenous people knew is that we know relatively little about all but the most famous civilizations in the Americas. While their accomplishments are occasionally overstated by the overzealous, the far more common trend is that pre-Columbian Americans are underestimated by those who do not go out of their way to study them. Even a better-known civilization such as the Maya in Mesoamerica has only had a very small percentage of its ruins excavated, and new cities, even massive ones, are constantly being discovered, significantly transforming our understanding of them within the last century. Not that I imagine we will find paladins and trebuchets in the ruins, but I do expect that more light will reveal an ever grander display of the size and scope of New World civilization. Our problem is not always so much a lack of history as a lack of discovery. The final point before getting into my list is that I don't believe it's likely or necessary to have all of these civs in ranked, hence my focus in the last video on content and assets more generally. I do think we need at least 2 from South America, and 3 still sounds good, but in general I'd rather have fewer civs that really feel like they fit the theme, nail the design, and create unique gameplay, than more civs that feel unfinished, uninspired, and overwrought just for the sake of having more civs in ranked. And it's important to save design space and dev time for other regions to visit in the future. For runners-up and edge cases, the most realistic way for them to be represented in any capacity is likely with scenario units and buildings, or with a new mode featuring them as unranked civilizations that don't have to compete with the large and ever-growing ranked roster for design space and add to an increasing balancing burden. I love the idea of a Chronicles-style design for unranked outlier civs or edge cases in the hazier areas of history, impressive civilizations with poorly documented history or other limitations, especially applicable to so many in North and South America. Someone on the forums suggested such a mode called Legends for the Three Kingdoms factions, and I think that's a workable name. I'd love to do a deep dive into theory crafting a Legends-style take on New World civilizations, with more appropriately asymmetrical design, technology and unit reskins, regional units replacing the most significant anachronisms such as trebuchets and torsion engines, and battles and scenarios based around real but poorly documented events and conflicts, such as the rise of Marajo, the Wari expansion, the Polynesian exchange, and others, but that's outside my scope here. Also note that I'm only talking about South America, often conflated with, but distinct from Mesoamerica.
Stop lecturing me, please.
Which I may cover with the rest of North America and the Caribbean in the future. None of these are full civ builds, just partial design sketches. With all that out of the way, let's get into it. In 6th place, I'm going with the Muiscas, or Chibcha Confederation of Colombia. They're the only civilization on this list that has the distinction of already having one of their unique technologies in the game, for the wrong civilization. I'm referring to El Dorado, which doesn't have anything to do with the Maya, although a change for this seems to be in the works with the very much improved, but still somewhat generic name Cotton Armors. The K'iche word for this is Shkapupulsh, which I like for the more specifically Mayan flavor, and because I want to see pros and casters try to pronounce it.
Because multiplayer, the Soxodal warriors are actually pretty bad.
Back to El Dorado, it also originally had nothing to do with a city made of gold. Rather, it referred to El Rey Dorado, a Zipa or chief of Bacata, who as part of his ascension ritual would be covered in gold dust, and after sailing on a raft to the middle of Lake Guadavita, would dive into the water to wash off the gold, along with other gold objects and emeralds that would be thrown into the lake as offerings. The Muisca unique unit was the Guecha warrior, and the chronicler's consensus is that they were beefcakes. They might manifest as a dart thrower and spearman hybrid that starts with very low initial damage stats, but benefiting from both infantry and archer attack and armor upgrades, and that can switch between ranged and melee modes. An elite spearmisher, if you will. They could also have an archer or blowgunner that fires poison darts, especially to represent mercenaries hired from their neighbors. And I like the idea of El Rey Dorado, the Golden King himself, being represented as a unique economic unit that passively generates gold while alive, and perhaps buffs the work rate of nearby villagers.
Es estupendo ser el rey.
Or we could recycle the technology name itself and tie in a related gold-producing effect. The Muiscas also carried relics of their ancestors, sometimes their actual mummies, into battle, meant to inspire their warriors and intimidate the enemy. This could be implemented as a bonus wherein monks carrying relics provide a significant aura combat boost to your fighters, and with some protection for the monk, such as regeneration and pierce armor, to prevent them from being sniped too easily by ranged units, thus trivializing the bonus. Emerald and salt mines could be introduced as gold mine reskins or variants, as those played an important role in the wealth of the Muiscas and their neighbors. The Muiscas might be bundled together as an umbrella civilization with other Colombian tribes such as the Muso and Panche, who had more success in resisting the Spanish, and whom the Muiscas sometimes employed as mercenaries. This would also provide a larger pool of inspiration for civilization bonuses, as tribes known as the Palenques, after their highly fortified villages, complete with layered walls, moats, and hidden spikes and pitfalls, also employed tripcords that dropped logs onto unwary enemies approaching along forest trails, and were able to greatly delay Spanish incursions with their traps and forts. Limitations of the Muisca are their relative isolation, scarcity of recognizable architecture and documented military feats, and constrained scope of their metallurgy, mainly trade and luxury goods consisting of precious metals and alloys such as tumbaga, rather than metal tools or weapons. So I consider them fairly stretchy in that regard, even though I really like the flavor of the region. While this list is mostly about potential ranked civilizations, the Muiscas are my top pick for an unranked legend civilization, which seems appropriate in connection with the legend of El Dorado, along with another civilization. Fifth place goes to the Chachapoyas, warriors of the clouds, who lived in the cloud forests bridging the Amazon and Andes, and who managed some of the trade between these regions. According to Indiana Jones lore, they also created the temple and golden idol from this famous scene, although that of course is Hollywood balderdash. But maybe the temple trap sequence can still provide inspiration for Age of Mythology, or was itself inspired by the clever traps of the Palenques and other Colombian tribes we've mentioned. Still, it's not hard to understand why the real Chachapoyas captured imaginations. Given their impressive strongholds in the Amazonian Andes, their seemingly egalitarian society, their reputation as warriors, and even an odd detail of history where they were said to be exceptionally good-looking. These Chad Chapoyas endured for many centuries before the rise of the Inca, against whom they had some early success, but were bested and occupied by the Inca armies like so many before them. Even so, their fighting spirit was never fully vanquished, as they proved difficult to rule, and frequently rebelled against the Inca. There's even one account that plausibly suggests that they may have poisoned the Inca ruler Huayna Capac.
Oh, right, the poison for Cusco.
The Chachapoyas most likely fought with Civ number 2 on this list, which may have been the reason for their fortresses being built in the first place, and would have had some contact with Civ number 1, but with no known conflicts. Only an estimated 5% of Chachapoya sites have been excavated, but those that have been uncovered are fairly mind-blowing, and have earned this people a reputation as builders of mighty fortresses. Their most famous site as yet is Cuelap, sometimes called the Machu Picchu of the North, but far older, possibly begun around the 6th century AD. and far larger in terms of stone volume, estimated as using 3 times the volume of stone as the Great Pyramid at Giza. It's also at a higher altitude than even that Inca city in the clouds. Assaults on this type of fortress would have been exceptionally difficult due to its impressive defenses, with high walls manned by slingers, and long, narrow uphill entryways like a long castle gatehouse that greatly constricted passage, and made single-file intruders easy targets to warriors above. Even the Inca seem to have had little success in engaging these fortresses directly, but were eventually able to take map control and starve the Chachapoyas out in prolonged sieges. A possible in-game reflection of this defensibility would be to have built castles spawn with corner walls, or similar obstacles greatly limiting the number of enemy units that could attack its base until they were destroyed. There's likely a more elegant way to implement this, perhaps with a new type of gatehouse, but that's functional enough for this discussion. A possible Chachapoya unique technology could be called Yakdafuyu from Quechua, meaning something like Cloud Village or Cloud Nation. The effect of this tech is that defensive buildings, that is towers, town centers, and castles, would deal more damage to enemies at the base of the building, like a more generalist version of the obsolete Persian technology boiling oil, and representative of the Chachapoyas usually having the defensible high ground, as well as the narrow entryways that would have allowed defenders on the walls above to deal more damage to invaders, like the machicolations, or dare I say murder holes, of a castle or gatehouse. Mechanically, this could be similar to the Puru's Patiyoda longbowmen, but with a shorter effective range of 1. The Chachapoyas were also renowned for the effectiveness of their slingers more generally, who were praised variously as fierce and indomitable warriors whose stones struck like lightning, and as having great stamina and endurance in sustaining battle, enduring hardship, and using hit-and-run tactics effectively when outside their fortresses. If this civ is ever added, then perhaps the Inca should be given the recent Chronicles Puru bonus of generating food from stone, since the Chachapoyas were pretty good at making the Inca eat rocks. All in all, quite the athletic specimens from what we hear about them. The current Inca slinger should become a regional unit, perhaps with some bonus for the Inca, but I like the idea of the Chachapoyas having a unique slinger as well. Perhaps a fast-moving and hard-hitting generalist slinger, like a cross between a plumed archer and a conquistador. A final point of interest about them is that they buried some of their dead within the nearly sheer faces of inaccessible cliffs, which I wouldn't entirely know how to reflect as a civ bonus unless there was a reasonable way to implement rock climbing without making it useless on most maps and broken on one or two. The Chachapoyas could appear in the Inca campaign, and could have their own historical scenario or two of resisting the Inca for a time, or siding with the Spanish on a revenge tour in the conquest of the Inca. In fourth place, and I know this is some people's number one choice, are the Araucanians or Mapuches, native to Chile and Argentina.
But do you think there are any civs that are still missing from the game?
Do they have the Mapuche?
No.
The Mapuches are sometimes said to appear too late in the time period, which has previously been a major concern of mine, as they certainly do fit more comfortably into the AoE3 era. Like the Huns, their most iconic era is not very compatible with strict medieval chronology, but they're one of the few exceptions that I don't think would really water down the theme or setting of the game, with the understanding that these two are the brackets or edge cases. After all, their obvious campaign, including Leftraru among others, would take place within the extended timeline that has existed since the Conqueror's expansion, and before much of the Burmese campaign. Ultimately a rather mild stretch that I'm not inclined to balk at in light of a recent gymnastic marathon. Also, like the Huns, they're quite constrained in terms of known technologies and buildings within the time frame, and I would probably give them the most limited tech tree overall. Also like the Huns, their military feats and cool factor are very compelling nonetheless. Ultimately, technology is one of the proxies wherewith we might roughly gauge how different civs would match up against each other, but at least in their confrontations with the Spanish, the Mapuche's adaptability allowed them to greatly outperform and outlast some other New World civilizations that also had great warriors, and that we would otherwise think of as much more advanced, but that suffered due to the inflexibility of their approach to warfare.
We have the most advanced weapons in the world available to us. I've always believed that the mind is the best weapon.
At the end of the day, this is a war game, and the Mapuches had some major successes in that department, becoming the greatest threat the Spanish ever faced in the New World, and preserving their independence for hundreds of years beyond the scope of AoE2. The Mapuche's other claim to fame is as one of very few American civilizations that could justifiably have access to cavalry and some gunpowder units, as they famously captured these prized items from the Spanish and used them to mount a successful resistance within the game's time frame. although I don't think they should have cavalry until at least Castle Age, and of course no gunpowder until Imperial. Their first cavalry corps was formed in 1553 under Leftraru, and they were known to field up to 3,000 horsemen by 1599, although the use of gunpowder was much more limited in that time frame. The Araucanians also had an earlier confrontation with the Inca at the Maule River. As you may have guessed, I envision Mapuches as having several parallels with the Huns, and perhaps even having their wonder be a captured Spanish building. Compared to their northern neighbors, the Mapuches were not known for intensive agriculture, but rather smaller-scale subsistence horticulture. So I like the idea of the Araucanians missing farms, but instead being able to aura farm by planting forage bushes, or one of the reskins previously considered. They would also have a new regional unit called the Ajo Thrower, from the Quechua word for the bolas. The Ajo Thrower would also go to the Inca, and another civilization further down the list who were especially associated with them, where we will consider them further. Their unique unit could be the Malon Raider, a cavalry unit that can plunder resources from buildings, as well as the carried resources of any villager it killed, and perhaps 1/3 the carried gold of a trade unit it killed. I'm depicting it here with the available Xolotl warrior skin, but it should look and perform like a Mapuche steppe lancer. The Mapuches might also have the ability to get back a percentage of resources from their own deleted or destroyed buildings to represent their scorched earth tactics. Another one of their civ bonuses might be the ability to redeem a very heavily discounted Malone Raider or gunpowder unit for every enemy cavalry or gunpowder unit defeated, representative of them capturing these animals and weapons. I like the idea of the Mapuches being able to accumulate tactical advantages through raiding, possible terrain-related bonuses, and even some mildly favorable information asymmetries, like being able to see the tracks left by enemy units for a moderate amount of time, as discussed elsewhere, or being able to hear the gallop of unseen but nearby cavalry units, similar to how you can currently hear the distant rumble of enemy onagers cutting through a forest. An obvious possible unique technology for them would be Koya Yaoyin, a collective term for a comprehensive system of training encompassing various activities for strength, speed, endurance, general toughness, and mastery of various weapons, among other things. The name refers to an ant's impressive power given its size, and the strength, swiftness, and skill of Mapuche warriors was highly regarded, if not legendary. A possible effect for this would be to have land units move and attack 15% faster. Despite not making my top 3 on the basis of time frame and technology, this is a fan favorite with what is perhaps the most well-documented and marketable campaign, and as such I actually think this may be the most likely civilization to be added to South America. We'll have to wrap it up here and finish with my top 3 in another video, but let me know what you think about these candidates, as well as a possible new Legends mode to cover some American civilizations. And if you want to see another American build with cavalry and gunpowder, check out my video on the Tlaxcalteca. That's all for today, and thanks for watching. This has been the primary part of perusing possibly promising playable pre-Columbian peoples. Till next time.